Hi, my name is Terry Hess, and I was a lead programmer, modeling lead, art director, and a level designer on Camilla the Colorful. This is somewhat like a postmortem and of my experience and just a record of what I did on the game to showcase some of my skills. Excuse the background behind me. I just found the quietest room, and it happened to be my daughter, so that's why we have a purple walls and everything. I wrote a script because there's no way for me to remember everything, so I'm just going to read from what I wrote. I tried to use my developer's logs as references and what I could remember. I know I can't remember everything, but this is what I do remember. Okay, for the programming, I'll start with the player. In the beginning, I use the UI text and numbers to show the player's health. I used the current health and made the UI health value equal to the current health value. Then to make the UI health change colors from green, yellow to red, I made functions for that when the UI health value was between certain numbers, the UI health text would turn to the corresponding color. Later converted the color change to be the slider bar, which we currently use. Okay, I made a public function that added health to use in health butterflies to allow the player to gain back health. Then I made a public function to use with objects that take health. In the damage function, I added the sound for the player being hurt, the screen flash in the update. It makes the screen flash that makes a screen flash red using the color.lerp. And of course the damage itself as a parameter of the function. I also made the health so it could not go above 100 or below 0. That way when we called the health or the damage function in the enemies, it would automatically do all those things: sound, screen flash, take health. Okay, for the camouflage mechanic, I made a slider that decreases with the press of a button and decreasing the current camo variable with time.delta time minus time.delta time. At first I made the time decrease when the button was held down, but later I changed it to a toggle so that when the button would start, the slider would decrease, and then when it was hit again it would stop. I made and hooked up the animation to play when the decreasing time is active. The animation makes the chameleon material transparent and changes the material's colors. I try to do like a rainbow, going from like the start color of a rainbow to the end color of a rainbow. The reason the enemies don't hurt the player while in camouflage is because the tag is changed to player camo. And I also disabled the tongue mechanic while in camo so that the player cannot swipe. This helped balance the strength of the camo mechanic. I also rigged the chameleon model and hooked up all the animations, which I'll talk about more when I speak about the role as modeling lead. For climbing, I made a trigger at the top of the trees that turned off the climbing script so the player would automatically detach. Also made a nest at the top of the trees that has a trigger to disable the collider so that the player can climb through the nest, and then when the player gets through the nest collider enables again. I made the animation hooked up for when the player is attached to the trees that the chameleon turns a yellow to let them know that they are attached and can start climbing up. We used a side-scrolling script from the asset store to save time, but in it I removed the jump and some other components we weren't using and added the walk animation, a zoom that changes the camera's field of view out while you're walking and zooms back in when you're stopped, and it does that by speed. It divides the number you put for speed into the field of view. So if you put 2 as a number in your field of view 70, the speed of the camera zoom would be 35. And then I think we did 98 for the zoom out, and it was like 2.8, so 2.8 divided by 98 is 35. Okay, and then the order. Okay, I also added sound when the player walks in a similar way to the zoom. So when the way I did it is when the player's walking, move, with the keys or D-pad, the walking sound's enabled and disabled when you're not pressing nothing. I also hooked up the player idle walk animation here and a second idle for when the player stops moving with no other actions for 20 seconds. So when you don't hit a button for 20 seconds, the second idle starts playing. I hooked up the climb animation in the climbing script, basically the same way as walk was hooked up. The walk animation, just when they're pressing up and attached to the tree, it does the climbing animation or down. There was a separate script for walking in which I did the same thing that are above. For the mobile walking, there's a mobile walking script that I did the same stuff for. At the beginning, we used the drag rigid body script for the tongue, which added that if the object wasn't tagged tongue, then it could be dragged. Added if the object was tagged tongue, then it could be dragged, but that wasn't compatible with mobile. Because it was for the mouse, because the mouse and the mobile couldn't tell when you was pressing on the D-pad and touching the screen because it was only looking for one mouse. So I found the script and asset store that allowed multiple objects to be dragged at once. So I used that script for the grab box around the tongue, and we ended up using it for PC and mobile versions. During that, I was researching mobile, and I also learned how to tell how many touches are on the screen, and then to be able to do whatever I want from the however many touches. Next, I want to talk about the snake enemies. For the snakes, I used the tag player to identify the player, and I used the raycast and distance to tell the snake when to move, attack, and to stop. If the player is close enough, a cooldown timer starts and attacks the player. The snake attacks at 0. At this point, I use the attacking animation. If the player is at a greater distance than attack and less than stop, then the snake moves to the player, and also hooked up the move animation there. And if the player is greater than the range, the range of the distance, the snake stops moving and goes into idle animation. I also made a sound to play for the attack. I use Unity's Now Match agent for the snake to move on and to adjust its speed. If the player uses camo for 3 seconds, the snake goes back to its starting position. I set the snake health up as a public for damage, so when it's hit the player, it plays a sound and takes damage, plus plays the particle effect. When the snake dies, it goes to the death function where the death animation plays, then it destroys the snake. We use a rock to kill the snakes, and their damage to the snakes is above 100, so they work as an instant kill. For the camo butterflies, I made them move to the player when the tongue hits them. At the point, I added the sound to play and a +5 text to be active that moves up to show how many points the player receives for the butterfly, and then it destroys after a few seconds. At that point, I also added the points to the player's score on the UI. Once the butterfly collides with the player, I added the 1 value to the current camo in the camo bar so that they gain 1 camo back. This will be 1 second of camo. For the Raven, I switched the model from Legacy to Generic, made the animator controller, and set up the flying animations to default, which is something I did for the most of the models in the game. I also switched animation states with Unity's MacAnima state machine. For rolling rocks, for the rolling downhill rocks, I made a spawner that uses an array to add multiple spawn points for the rocks. I use time intervals to spawn the rocks and rigid body and physics to make them roll. They damage the player is to kill the snakes. The point of this is to lure the snakes into the rocks since the player has no way to attack. For the rock traps, I made a switch that is active by the tongue when the tongue hits it. When the switch is hit, the lever moves down by an animation I made. It plays a particle effect, and the platform holding the rock has a blocker which is destroyed and plays a particle effect, an explosion, and a rock rolling sound. The rock rolls off the platform and kills the snakes. And with the downhill rocks, if it hits the player or snake, the rock is destroyed. If it doesn't hit the snake or a player, there's a trigger that it rolls through when it rolls off the platform that destroys it a couple seconds later. The downhill rock, I just said that. Okay, for the spikes, lava and water, play a sound when the player hits their collider, and then add the damage. If the player dies on lava, I turn the kinematic on the player off, or on, sorry, I turn the kinematic on when they die, and then back on when they hit the spawn point. That's because they had force on them, which bounces the player in the air, and they were bouncing when they got back to the spawn. Okay, for the regular plants, I set the idle animation to play if the player is outside of the shooting trigger, and attack animation if the player is inside the shooting trigger. Okay, for the plant mini boss, I did the same, but instead of fireballs, he shoots coconuts that the player deflects back at him with the tongue. I added a hitbox around the player or the enemy's head, the plant's head, and a health slider. It only takes 1 hit to kill him, the plant. And then his death animation plays, the slide bar goes down to 0, and the wall explodes so the player can pass at that point. I also added for an anchor to appear so the player can get up on the platform. I also added audio when he dies and shoots coconuts.